Hello and welcome to another episode of the Curious Mind podcast. My name is Gabriel Ellis. I'm a psychologist, psychotherapist, and I got my doctorate degree in Buddhist studies. And today I want to complete the small series that I made about original Buddhism. In the first episode, I tried to give you the historical and cultural context in which the Buddha came up with his teaching. And the second episode, I focused on what I see as the basis and the fundamental aspect or attitude of Buddhism, namely the teaching that nothing has a self nature, that everything, every phenomenon comes up as a result of conditions that suited this phenomenon to arise, and when these conditions fall apart, then also this phenomenon falls apart. And a direct consequence of this is that we don't put, and what I mean we, the audience of the Buddha, which are the monks and nuns who followed him, that they don't put the faith that they have of the spiritual aspirations into anything that is conditioned, be it something mundane as sensual pleasure and wealth and money and so on, or something that is more spiritually elevated, which is when, because of certain conditions, I reach a meditation state that feels calm and sublime and happy and so on. Also, in that, we don't put our faith. We continue to be dispassionate about anything that is conditioned, including our deeply rooted identifications with the so-called five khandhas, those different dimensions of attachment or identification that I mentioned last time. So regarding all of these, we are dispassionate in order then to progress and to elevate the mind so that in the end, the goal of complete liberation occurs. Today, I want to go more into the details. Last time I told you that I focused on the first aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path, which was right views. And right views is basically a shorthand for the teachings of the Buddha about these fundamental things of how we have to regard and how do we have to understand the mind, its natural inclination to attachments, and to see the phenomena of the mind in a very contra-intuitive way, namely as not having their own essence, being based on conditions. Now, let's look at the other aspects of the Eightfold Path. The second one is right thought, the third one, right speech, then right action, right livelihood, right effort, right meditation, and then the right unification of the mind. The right meditation is sati, which I will come to talk about later, and the unification of the mind is samadhi. Now, most of those aspects are not really interested to me today because they are not originally Buddhist. To have a way of thinking, a way of speaking, a way of acting, to have a certain kind of livelihood, to put some effort into the spiritual training is more or less common to all spiritual traditions today and back then as well. Just to mention again, the one that we have most information about, the Jainas, the Nigantas, they still exist today, and they also have a code of ethics, focusing much stricter in a certain way than Buddhism on non-violence. What is interesting to us is a little bit right effort, and then the sati, what I call meditation, and then the unification of the mind, which is samadhi. To circle back a little bit to the last topic, where I highlighted the dependent origination, I want to emphasize that this understanding of dependent origination or dependent emergence is the dependent emergence of suffering. It's not the dependent emergence of everything. If that would be it, then there would be no liberation possible. So dependent on origination is the origination of suffering. Coming now to the central aspect, what I think of the Buddhist practice, it is, leaving aside ethics and so on, it is meditation. And I will highlight why that is. Meditation is the place, the practice, the setup where the final liberation takes place, or as a consequence of which the final liberation takes place. And the texts are so clear about that that we have no reason to challenge this understanding of Buddhism. Now, why is it that meditation is so difficult, and why is that we Westerners, when we think of Buddhism, we immediately go to the practice of meditation? Why is that a misunderstanding? Because the ability to meditate successfully, and I put this a little bit in quotes, the successfully, but in order to reach and achieve the absorptions of meditation, the fruit of meditation, we need to prepare the mind. And here comes in the hubris and the overestimation of the typical Western mindset. We think that as soon as we have intellectually grasped a concept, when someone has described to us how meditation practice, for example, works, then we can just sit down and start to practice, and then eventually we should come to the conclusion. A little bit like in philosophy. But just as in philosophy, we cannot sit down and, without any preparation, read texts like of Plato or of Kant or of Hegel or whoever you like. It needs prerequisites. We need to establish a certain way of thinking, a resoluteness of logical rigor, for example, for many philosophical texts. So for someone who is not prepared for it, they will open up the book, read something, and it will make no sense for them. And then they will think that it's stupid, overcomplicated, or something in of this sort. And similarly, and even much, much, much more so, the practice of meditation depends on a certain setup, on conditions. There are several terms for that in the Buddhist Pali language. One concept is that of a gradual path, a gradual development of the spiritual practitioner. It starts with ethics. So ethics is something that might not be unique to Buddhism, but nonetheless, it is something that ascetics or aspiring ascetics have to go through in order to prepare the mind to, for example, rid itself of the most crude, violent impulses that it has, the emotional impulses to misdirect our thoughts, to hijack our intentions, for example. For all of that, proper ethics is important. The Buddhist variation of what proper ethic means, and here they disagreed a little bit with the other spiritual directions of the time. For the Buddha, proper ethics is that when thinking, when acting, when communicating, I make sure that I do it in a way that doesn't harm me and doesn't harm others. So this is basically how the texts describe the approach to ethics. A next preparation is moderation and lifestyle, restraint when it comes to sensual pleasures, and to establish an awareness in daily life with a strong emphasis on my body awareness, to understand at any given moment, and of course this is a strong, high ideal, to understand in every given moment what my body is doing, how it moves, how I direct my attention, when I direct the attention into the body, how I'm looking back and forth, how I swallow, how I defecate, all of those bodily functions, to see them as they are in a very sober way, and recognizing what is happening with my body and the way that I utilize it. This is already a pretty good setup for what then comes later, the meditation practice. There is a step that is somewhere in between kind of the basic awareness, the practice of basic awareness, and the very specific meditation techniques. And these are called the Brahma Viharas. This is the divine abodes, as they are translated in English. Brahma is basically to put it simply, the highest Indian divinity. And a vihara is a location, an abode, a place. So this is a practice that is supposed to bring to the spiritual practitioner to a place that is usually reserved for divine beings, the highest divine beings. What these do, basically, let me just tell you the four major practices. One is metta, loving kindness. The next one is compassion. The third one is sympathetic joy, to be joyful with others. And the fourth one is equanimity. I will come to this equanimity later. But basically, this is the establishment, the cultivation of qualities of heart. And as it is described in the texts, they provide, when they're fully established, a ceto vimutti, which is a liberation of consciousness. This we have to understand as temporary. This is not the final liberation of what is then termed nirvana or nibbana, but it is so powerful that it liberates the heart, it liberates consciousness, and is often described in such a way that it seems to be an ideal setup for the higher meditations and for liberation in general. It is sometimes not clear if this is entirely Buddhist, but it seems to me from the text studies that it's actually quite a Buddhist approach to aid, to support the practitioner in their quest. And we know from Thai Buddhism, for example, they have a forest tradition there where a certain group or tradition of monastics tried to emulate the life of the Buddha by leaving the monasteries and basically living in the forests in very simple ways, harsh conditions. And some of those teachers in this forest tradition, they taught metta, loving kindness, those heart qualities, to the monastics, so that under the harsh conditions, they have a protection. So you can imagine that there are wild animals in the forest, and monastics are not allowed to defend themselves physically. But what they can do is that they can develop a heart of loving kindness that radiates so much, so they say, that wild animals would not attack them, because they would basically sense that there is no danger coming from this person or being otherwise pacified by their radiance. So it has this double function of liberating the mind and of serving as a protector of body and mind. And by the way that these meditations are described is that the heart quality of, for example, loving kindness is so established that the heart starts to radiate to all directions equally. So this is a high accomplishment. This is by no means an easy feat. This is just as demanding as the other meditation techniques. Okay, so we had ethics, which is not particularly Buddhist, but is necessary for an ascetic. There is moderation, sense restraint, and awareness during daily life activities, especially with a focus on the body. Also, that might not be originally Buddhist, but is necessary for an ascetic lifestyle that is geared towards a final liberation on the Buddhist path. Then we have this quite specific Buddhist meditation practice of the divine abodes, Brahma Vihara, and the most prominent of them is loving kindness. And now we come to the realm of meditation, which includes two terms, mostly the jhanas. These are the levels of absorption, and samadhi is the general term for the mind that is unified. And after that, according to the text, there is the full liberation or cessation or nibbana. Now, what is the thing that stands out in Buddhist meditation? Because the other traditions were meditating in a way as well, we have to assume, and we have some hints that they were doing spiritual practices. They did, of course, they did something with the mind. For example, the harsh ascetics of which the jainas were basically part of this camp, in order to endure all this pain, all the fasting, of course, you have to do something with the mind. It needs a resoluteness, it needs a harshness, it needs a strength, and also mental qualities that enable the people to do these harsh things. So we can call that meditation. What was unique about the Buddha and his approach to meditation? What is unique about him is that he understood that harshness and self punishment and this extreme form of asceticism is not conducive to the spiritual path. Quite the opposite. He discovered that joy is a necessary motor, a necessary catalyst for the development in spiritual meditation. This has a term in the Buddhist language. It's called the middle path. And it describes that the Buddha understands that there is something else, a third thing, besides the extremes of sensual pleasure, which basically characterizes lay life, like fame, money, sensual gratifications, sexuality, food, and all the other joys. So this is seen as an extreme. The other extreme is the self-mortification that the ascetics at the Buddha's time practiced, and he understood there is a third element. Ascetics are afraid of pleasure, probably because it reminds them of the worldly pleasure, the mundane pleasures of lay people, and they're afraid to slip away from their ascetic practices if they give in to their sensual pleasures. So they have a tendency to be quite afraid of those and to shun those and to criticize those. Here's a quote from the Buddha that shows basically the shift in his attitude. Now, we don't have to assume that he literally said this, but something like this must have occurred. The quote goes like this: "Why am I afraid of that pleasure? For it has nothing to do with sensual pleasures or unskillful qualities." This is the description of the Buddha describing the meditation that goes along joy, the experience of joy. And then he reflects and asks himself, why am I afraid of this? Implying that he and other ascetics are or were afraid of this. And so he questions this implicit dogma, this fear of any kind of pleasure, rejects it, follows it, and thus develops the higher meditations that then lay the foundation for his liberation. He then further reflects, once he discovers that this is good for him, that he wants to develop this, quote, "I can't achieve that pleasure with a body so excessively emaciated." So this is basically putting him into a practice of extreme fasting and asceticism, and then the understanding, I cannot even sustain the energy of such pleasure. I cannot keep it. I cannot achieve it if my body is so weakened. And so, according to the mini biography in those suttas, he started to eat a little bit more, and thus to deviate from the other ascetics and their practices. We get so many hints in the Buddhist text about how important joy was for him, so that it is basically the most important characteristic of the first jhana, the first clear stage of absorption in the Buddhist meditation. And I read you the quote for that. It's repeated so many times in the Buddhist suttas. We assume that it is quite old, and something like that must have been part of original Buddhism as well, be it in another wording. Here comes the quote. "Quite secluded from sensual pleasures," the dangers of what lay people live, "secluded from unskillful qualities, the meditator enters and remains in the first absorption, which has rapture and bliss born of seclusion as a quality." Rapture and bliss, strong, joyful terms here, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. So there's an interpretation of that it refers to a meditation technique. So it's secluded from sensual pleasures, it's secluded from other unskillful qualities, then the mind, after those preparations that I laid out before, the ethical, the sense restraint, the awareness on the body, and so on, after all that, the meditator goes into this joyful state of mind. Now, how to navigate this finding of the joy within the meditation? Here, the Buddhist texts are interestingly specific, and they say the meditator drenches, steeps, fills, and spreads his body with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. There is no part of the body that is not spread with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. And here the texts provide also a simile. It's like when a deft bathroom attendant or their apprentice pours bath powder into a bronze dish, sprinkling it little by little with water. They knead it until, kneading like dough, they knead it until the ball of bath powder is soaked and saturated with moisture, spread through inside and out, yet no moisture oozes out. In exactly that way, the meditators drench, steep, fill, and spread their body with rapture and bliss. So it's not about to recognize that bliss. No, we maximize the awareness, the feeling of the bliss, and spread it all through the perception of our body. This is the instruction which shows how important, how essential the development and the mastery of this quality of joyful meditation is in original Buddhism. It establishes the first absorption in meditation. And then it goes on. The joy develops in meditation in different levels. There are different lists in the Buddhist texts that describe this. I put two lists together to give you an idealized version of how the progress in meditation happens. The beginning is there must be a teaching, a dharma. And like I pointed out last time, in right view, to convey to the thirsting ears and mind of the one who wants to know, who wants to practice, to convey to them, at least in the beginning, the intellectual concepts of what truth is. Intellectually, but yet convincing in a resonating way so that they understand, yes, this must be true. It is not realized yet, but it has been confirmed through their own understanding, through their own resonance as something that seems so much, makes so much sense, so that I want to dedicate my life to realize this in actuality. So this is the Buddha, Dharma, the Dhamma, the teaching. Then after those preparatory steps that I mentioned, when I actually sit down in meditation, I employ sati, which is usually translated as mindfulness, but literally sati from Sanskrit smriti is memory. And I take it not in the sense of mindfulness. I think this is a mistranslation. I take it literally. It's the memory. The memory of what? It's the memory of the Buddha's teaching. So when I sit down, I allow to come up an aspect of the teaching that I want to practice. The next step is Dhamma Vichaya, which is the investigation of the teaching. So I heard the teaching from the Buddha or one of his students, my meditation teacher. In the meditation, I bring it up into my memory, and then I start to investigate it. I chew on it. Or in other words, I relate the teaching, for example, of impermanence, I relate it to what is happening in my own mind. I can see and watch how my mind is constantly composed and decomposed, how impermanence is a founding principle of how my mind works all the time. And so chewing on it, investigating it, I see the truth of it. The next aspect that is pointed out is virya. It means strength. And here I can assume that it needs the vigor, it needs the courage, it needs the strength to apply again and again those aspects that I want to basically practice and discover, to apply it again and again to my mind. Out of that, there comes the first gladness, the first joy. It's called in Pali, it's pamuja, which is not yet a formal establishment of the first absorption, but it's a preparatory step. So even before I reach the first absorption in the Buddhist meditation, there's already joy. And here it is again, the characteristic of Buddhist meditation: pleasure, joy that is not coming from sensual gratification, as lay people would usually handle the approach to life. It's born out of the distance from it. It's born out of dealing, applying, and realizing the first aspects of the Buddhist teachings within my mind. This is that gladness. This is that joy. Out of that comes the first formal establishment of meditative joy. The Pali term is piti, which is a strong happiness. It's a strong joy that comes with fuller realization, or the harvesting, basically, the fruits of my investigations of the Buddha's teaching, applying the meditation method. This is this strong happiness. And now, as you heard before, as the simile went, or the description went, I take this joy, this strong happiness, and I fill up my whole body with that. And the result of that is the next step, which is the calmness of the body. Calmness, why? Because the body and the mind and the heart, finally, they have achieved what they set out to do. This is what we're usually striving for when we are following our desires in daily life, be it for food, acknowledgement, career, money. We actually hope to get this full satisfaction, to have the full bodily satisfaction as well. And here we have achieved it with meditation at this stage. And because we finally came home, because we finally got what we wanted, the body is pacified. Body is calm. The Pali term is passaddhi. As a result of that, the next step is called sukha, which is a more profound pleasure. I'm continuing to apply the Buddhist teaching also to that state of mind, to the strong happiness, to the calmness of the body. I'm applying my meditation to that. I understand it, and a result of that is a refinement of the pleasure, which is a more profound level, and this is sukha. Sukha, by the way, sometimes is the opposite of dukkha, of suffering. So it is a counterweight. It is a deep satisfaction that comes from that. And sukha is already goes into the direction and intersects with the even more fundamental term in meditation, samadhi, which is a profound unification of the mind. Meditation teachers have described it as a solid rock, solidity of the mind, of this pleasure, something that is very stable. This is what samadhi is, according to our descriptions. And the next step of that is to continue to apply the Buddhist teachings, for example, on conditionality, also to the samadhi. And we have descriptions where the next step is to see the samadhi and to understand the samadhi. And this level is in Pali called upekkha. The root of the word is upa-iksh, which means a close observation, closely seeing, closely observing. Observing what? I'm observing the samadhi, the state of samadhi. So I'm taking a distance from it. I observe it. This is what the concept is. And through that, I achieve the conditions according to the texts that lead more or less automatically, this is how the descriptions go, to the full liberation of the mind. Okay, so today I hoped to clarify and to show you, to convey to you what the fundamental characteristic of Buddhist meditation is. Namely, it is based on the preparatory steps of developing the mind so that it is withdrawn, it's self-contained, it's content because of the ethical habits that it has went through. It has made first steps into the skills that are then needed in meditation, namely in awareness, practice of awareness, withdrawing the senses from the outside world, keeping them inside, and then establishing, based on the Buddhist concepts, the Buddhist teachings that I investigate, establishing a joy that then is filled throughout the whole body, and then more and more refined, while I'm not clinging, of course, not attaching myself to those joys as an achievement, because I understand that these are just conditionally emerged. So I let them go. I continue to apply the Buddhist teaching of impermanence, of conditionality. The mind becomes more and more subtle. Also, the joy becomes more and more subtle. And then in the last steps, the samadhi, which is an incredibly refined, stable state of the mind, is then also observed with equanimity, with upekkha. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this episode, this three-part roundup of what seems to be the most fundamental aspects of original Buddhism. I hope you understand more how it's embedded in the ascetic culture of India, Northeast India of that time. Let me know if you have questions and comments. Subscribe if you're interested in more content like this, and I hope to see you next time.